It's true, because that's me. Now, stop here for the time being. Why do I raise this? Because your external examiner is going to be a difficult person to you. He might be nice. I don't know which came across once. He may be nice, wasn't it? Or he or she may be nice, but he or she could be a bit more probing. Okay, these are the things that could be probed. Okay, and it's part of the methodological kind of clearing the deck before you look at your result and anything else, because your result is heavily influenced and predicated by these two things. If there was such a thing, if they weren't a result of a previous items that I talked about, need for innovation, other things. So you have to see where you're coming from and where you're going to. How does the philosophy of research relate to your research method to contrasting position? So later on, I'm saying, now this is a dangerous bit, isn't it? Because now I'm making the world a bit of black and white, quantitative, qualitative. So the positivism and interpretivism is a kind of, let's put two contrasting positions and see if we can make more sense out of what we just talked about. So therefore you'll be more sophisticated in that sense. In effect, those contrasting bits underpins much of the quantitative versus qualitative kind of argument and so on so far. And also, what my colleague, I have the credit getting my colleagues, and she said it's a useful point to use, the kind of scientist, if you use a dangerous way of explaining that, the scientist versus the detective way of looking at research methods. Okay, let's see what it is. That's an interesting bit. Again, I think this was a useful idea to look at, suggested by my colleague. That in the, it can be broken up into roughly, these 3 or 4, there's 2 of them, it's actually overlapping, 3 or 4 ways of kind of key elements. One is the actual method that you use. So the classic example, of course, the techniques of a questionnaire, or techniques of ethnography, or something. The second is methodologies that looking at a bigger plan. There's an issue about strategy. There's an issue of the details of the design. And then also later on influencing the choice of methods. So there's an overlap. And then also there's a philosophical one, informing the methodology, providing the context and logic and criteria. So remember I talked about the anthropologist's way of looking at things. They have a practical way of doing things. It's basically informed by the philosophical perspective of how to know and what is true. They have their own ways of thinking. And lastly is to say, well, these two overlaps there, so we could collapse into one point. But the major question is that, okay, Johnny, we can identify those 3 or 4 things in it. Is having a basic problem with the practitioners like yourself is that sometimes you miss out some of them. And sometimes, in fact, you actually start with which one first you don't even know. You just jump into one of them without considering another. Or having later, the worst thing is, having done the field work, maybe one of those could be quite important. You go back and try to reinvent the wheel. Now, that also happened, a bit of that with myself when I did my doctorate like yourself. So I'm not talking as a saying. We do a bit of that, but do later on, basically, try to think through that. I've got a little diagram later, of course. Think about your own situation. Run yourself through the diagram. See if you miss out anything. If it's not strong features of yours, but at least you consider it. Now, positivism, researching as a scientist, and you know all that, so I won't go too far on that. The frequent use of models and hypotheses, just imagine, this is like natural sciences. I think the basic idea often is that, me can be one of those that should be blamed actually, kind of boxed in a way of thinking and nothing else. And we were taught from the first degree till much later, even doing a doctorate, as an economist. A classic example about this using model and hypothesis. We weren't encouraged, but we were told off to use any other methods. It was, for example, we should behave like a physicist, economist, physicist, that you have a logical model with assumptions, almost an imaginary world, but assumptions, and therefore come up with some expected relationship based on, or amongst the factors within the models, but based on assumptions. You have a logical prediction. A bit like a physical world, we've never been out there in the space, but based on some known facts and assumptions, we are a predictable model. So that is a classic way of being a positivist, way of looking at things. I mean, that itself is a philosophical thing, isn't it? Because you might ask me, Johnny, how come these big economists would force you to look at, to do your research like a physicist? Basically, their philosophical underpinning is this. Economists are very much skeptical about the way human beings providing facts. Now, they never say it, but that's inherent in the way that they design the research methods. Why? Now, let's take two examples. A classic example. Let's talk about questioning about whether you like soft drinks or not. So you have person A, person B. Person A being asked, how do you like soft drink? Or say, how do you like Coca-Cola? Both are Coca-Cola drinkers, right? And the first one said, I like it a lot. Drink it all the time. And the second one said, yeah, quite a lot, regularly. Now, the economy is going to be a bit, how do I make out of this? From the transcripts. The economists prefer to do this. Personally, tell me, how many Coca-Cola do you drink in a week? So the first person said, I love it. One a day at least, actually. The second person said, I love it, yeah, regularly. In fact, 2 a day. Or 3. Now, the economists are terribly averse to information provided by respondents which is not measurable. Because of that one. Now, they can see their problems, and you can see the justification. That's a philosophical point. For a fit for purpose kind of thing, they may have a strong point even. But later on, because of fit for purpose as well, you can turn the same argument the other way around. That's later, for you. So, the deductive methods, like talk about predicting the stars out there based on known facts and assumptions, that kind of thing, etc. So it's quantitative, measurable, because of all that leading to one thing later on. So, interesting enough, in your methodology side of it, if you have a philosophical underpinning, you go, some of the things that in the latter part of this explanation here are almost given, are driven by the earlier justification that we talked about. We're philosophical. Now, the interesting thing that you may ask me again, Johnny, if it's philosophical, do I run the risk of not winning the argument in my thesis in the first instance? The external examiner may say that, oh, I don't like that. Now, this is an unwritten part of it, that external examiners will give the benefit of the doubt of an approach that you would like to take, especially the philosophical one. Because within that, the width will be given to you, but once given, the benefit of doubt is given, the onus on you to really drive home within that those parameters, you will demonstrate that. You will take it further. So, if one were to take a feminism way of dealing with things, that is a starting point. As much as you define the topic, learning organization is what you would like to do. It's the same parameters that you put there in the first instance. But within that, we're going to have a go. We're going to have a go within that. So anyway, all that. So I'll give you an example, which is going to be contrasted later on. So a classic example here, maybe studying, say, high skill leading to better performance. So with the background of what I just talked about, a positivist, the way of approaching it, with a topic like this, high skills will lead to better performance. We're going to measure performance, won't we? We will. When we talk about define what high skills is, so some of the people, high skill include this, soft skills and all that. Oh, hang on a minute. The positive is that let's measure by qualification, shall we? Because I can measure that. But talk about other soft skill, high skill, dealing with people. I don't know what you mean by all this. Generic skills, how do we measure it? So there was a, you know, all this follows. That's to be contrasted with the next one. More ideas that you're the detective. Detective, interesting thing is that, remember, evidence actually is not as solid as you think. Think about an expert evidence in a court. Remember, it's interpretation. We have a professor, let's say in forensic, 40 years experience, looking at the evidence there and say, I think this is due to whatever, this, let's say, crime or injury is due to whatever. That's an interpretation or set of data the person had in the last 40 years. Remember. Now that's an interesting perspective. Interpretation. Because, interesting, because here, because in the previous idea, if you say, I want subjective evidence, you'll be hitting a wall straight away. Like a train hit a wall, you get hurt before you know it. But in this instance, evidence is always interpreted, leading to the justification of subjective ideas. We can give you width to that. The width for that. So therefore, inductive idea method will be very useful, and the ontology is being subjectivist and so on, all that follows all the way to qualitative, looking at methodology, looking at processes, relationships, etc. As opposed to be facts. Facts. In the quantitative approach there, positivist, facts is all the end of it. Be the end of it all. Facts is a starting point for the interpretist. We have something to work on with this. Think about it. Cool.
So,
ontology is literally questioning about that if we do use a philosophical approach to things, is that realities could be multiple. Probably true or not true is not a good way to start off with, to look at realities or facts. That's a very important thing that you should, I suggest, because remember my background in economics, give me a package. But I want to be open-minded, and I think it's a good thing. You should contest those ideas in your own respective projects. Rich?
I think it's important to note, too, that if you take a positive approach, you're making assumptions about truth knowing, about ontological issues, what is actually happening in epistemology, what can be known, and how you would get at it. When you take a positivist approach, you can still, an interpretist can turn right around and say, well, wait a minute, let me challenge the assumptions that went into that. You know, there's a saying that there are no facts. You know, they're just well-established theories, the things that are subjected to further research and questioning. And what the inductive approach allows us to do is to accept and embrace multiple realities, to hold them in front of us, even if they're paradoxical, and hold them in front of us instead of trying to make one prove the other one wrong. Be able to hold them both in front of us and see how they inform our research question. And that's the beauty of this. So even if you're taking a positive approach as a social science, it's a good idea to have a good understanding of the inductive side, because it enters into the assumptions that you use to establish where you're going to do your research from a positive standpoint.
I think what Rich said actually is why I'm becoming, people sometimes call me a traitor.
You're on the move, aren't you?
Exactly. That's precisely on my own personal dissatisfaction of using one toolbox, and I get stuck from time to time. So even for a positivist background person, I use the word background, no more, because I'm not anymore, that you should look at that. There's so much to be offered. Okay, so much not. That's a very good point. Sorry. Good. Instead of measuring and focusing what we mean by high skill and what we mean by performance that you can measure, is that really, even for similar topics, we might ask the question slightly, the title may be a little bit different, because it's going to be inductive, because it's going to be interpretive, because it's going to have facts, but that's not the end of the story, and so on. So the title may look like something like it, and also affect the methods that are going to be used. In what ways can high skills lead to better performance? All of that, interesting enough, may be involving even examining how workers, when they work, and how skills forms a part of their daily routine or the way they engage delivering their task, in doing the task. So measurement side may come in at some points. Now, I've already touched on something that I'll put a little note somewhere. What about the mixed method? I'll come back to that. So, but both parts of it involving studying the processes of how skills are affecting performance. And supposedly, can we measure? Can we have a predictable model?
Sorry, can I ask?